You've done a lot of music for Star Wars. You've done work on the Clone Wars and Rebels, and soon to be Bad Batch. Now, Star Wars has some of the most well-known music in movie history, and you've gotten to play around a lot with like the famous themes from the series, like for over a decade now. Is it still a bit surreal for you to think like I'm making music for Star Wars?
No, not anymore. Um, I don't know if it was ever really surreal. It was exciting. Um, I mean, there were definitely a couple pinch me moments, when I met with George Lucas the first time, and then continued to get to hang out with George is really cool. And I mean, other people, you would go, I would go up to like Skywalker Ranch, and I would see how precious his time was, and I'd spend like over an hour with him sometimes, and wow, that was fun.
Yeah. Cool. Now, your recent work in Star Wars is the final season of the Clone Wars. No, Clone Wars originally ended in, I think, 2013, and then was able to do its final season on Disney Plus last year. So was that a bit strange for you to come back to that particular era of Star Wars, like the Clone Wars and the prequels, after spending so long away from it?
Well, I was working on Rebels for the 4 years in between, or 5 years, whatever that was. Um, and so I was continuing to write music for Star Wars. So I guess the biggest challenge was to kind of reboot it, to go back. I forgot a lot of the music that I had written for the earlier shows, and I'd forgotten a lot of the themes, and so I needed to go back and refresh just my own memory on what I did previously, and then also we needed to kind of move it forward. And there was a lot of discussion with Dave Filoni. He's super hands-on, and he really talked a lot about what the music should be like, and we listened to a lot of things. We listened to, well, when we did Rebels, we went back and listened to A New Hope. That was one of the reboots that happened at the beginning of Rebels. We kind of wanted to change the music a little bit and go back to the John Williams roots, which we hadn't really explored that much in Clone Wars during the first 6 seasons. So there was just there was quite a bit of work involved in study and refreshing our memories and stuff.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And your score for the Clone Wars finale, Victory and Death, it's up for an Annie Award. So can you tell us how it feels to have your work on the final season, in particular that final episode, be nominated?
Well, it's just always a great honor. I mean, I've never won an Annie. I've been nominated, different shows 4, 5, 6 times. I don't know how many, maybe 5 times. It's, anybody who's a composer is going to be part of my speech if I win ever, is anybody who's a composer for animation and gets nominated for an Annie is a really good composer. It's the most difficult job I've ever had to do, is write for animation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the Siege of Mandalore, that final arc in Clone Wars, it's really interesting because it takes place concurrently with Revenge of the Sith. Like you see like mirrored events from episode 3 in the Siege. What I liked and kind of found interesting was how you used some of the musical cues from Revenge of the Sith in the Siege of Mandalore. Can you tell us Can you tell us like what your thought process was in using those certain cues to kind of tell us at what point in episode 3 we were in?
Well, I mean, writing for film at its best, or for media at its best, is a collaboration. And specifically, the director and the composer really have to be on the same page and really have to communicate at its best. And when that happens, you can do some really fun things. So Dave Filoni is really a hands-on director and really understands music really well. He grew up, his father taking him to operas. I think his father was a huge music fan, classical music fan. So Dave calls out certain areas in the show where he wants to do certain things. And specifically, what you probably are talking about is when Order 66 is invoked. I go back straight from the orchestration of John Williams and do exactly what John Williams did in the feature films for Order 66. And I can count on one hand the number of times that I've done that. It's very, very seldom. But Dave really wanted to do that. I think we wanted to really evoke that memory in people when they saw the Revenge of the Sith, and when they saw, because Order 66 is arguably the most dramatic and the most shattering thing that's ever happened in Star Wars. And so to bring back kind of, that flavor and that memory with the exact same music, I think it was a great call. And then we go on and do a lot of other things. What the great thing about Siege of Mandalore is that it explores the ramifications of Order 66 much more in depth than the movies ever did, and that being such a heavy thing, I think it was cool that we had a chance to really delve into that, what the meanings are for the clones, for the people who are, like for Ahsoka, who's they're trying to kill, even though she's not a Jedi anymore.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a huge amount of things that can be explored, both musically and dramatically, in the writing and directorially and everything.
Yeah, for sure. The other part that I really like, where the Revenge of the Sith score kind of kicks in, is like right at the beginning of Siege of Mandalore, when they're like coming down in the drop ships and then they get attacked in the sky, and Ahsoka is like jumping from ship to ship, and that musical moment mirrors like the very start of the film when Anakin and Obi-Wan enter the battle and stuff. I really liked that bit too. I thought that was neat.
Yeah. I remember watching that film, and just that whole sequence was so fun to watch in the theater.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, so when I get to go back into those kind of moments and do my take on the music is really a lot of fun for me. I mean, that's one of the things. So you asked me if it's surreal to be scoring Star Wars. I think it's just more fun as heck because I'm a fan, and hopefully I really feel it.
Yeah, for sure. And another big moment from that final arc that you delivered on was the duel between Ahsoka and Darth Maul, or Maul at that time. He's not a Sith anymore. So how did you come up with the music for that sequence? Was it hard for you not to delve too much into like the Duel of the Fates theme, to try and put your own spin on it?
No, it was something new. I mean, obviously that would have been a call, but I don't think we wanted to do that. There's always kind of voices involved with Maul in different ways. Even the first time we ever see Maul, John Williams didn't really write a theme for him. It was just kind of whispering voices you know,
change.
it's just it's very brief. You know, so I've written a couple of Maul themes over the years, and you know, between Rebels and Clone Wars, so that gave me a lot of material to mine in that duel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When it comes to the finale itself, Victory and Death, I love those final.
By the way, what a great title for a finale! Victory and Death. You know,
Yeah.
You know, you're gonna celebrate and you're gonna cry at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, it's like it's very bittersweet. Like Ahsoka gets away and survives. Yeah. Rex gets away with her, but like everything else has collapsed. So yeah. Very bittersweet. Yeah, so the final few minutes of that episode, I really like how there's no dialogue at all. It's just kind of, you know, Ahsoka and Rex are just overlooking the graves and then getting ready to leave, and then some time later, who knows how long, Darth Vader shows up and sees all the graves and Ahsoka's lightsaber.
Yeah. While
your score plays in the background, I found it really reminds us of the era's conclusion, like the prequel era ending, and kind of what it cost everybody, and the journeys of Ahsoka, Rex, and Anakin / Vader. Was that final piece of music kind of intimidating for you, like knowing that there was going to be like no dialogue, it would all rely on your score?
You know, I think what was more intimidating was the call, which was made again by Dave Filoni, to really be super electronic in that music. So I think we needed to find, and I co-write a lot of this music with my sons, and they were heavily involved in those last two cues, those last two pieces of music, both in the graveyard and then with Darth Vader. And they're really well versed in kind of electronic sounds and stuff. I mean, they do a great job with the orchestra as well. But at that, you know, they give me a lot of help when it comes to the electronic aspect of things. I mean, and it's one of the things that I think has helped my career have longevity, is I get to lean on these younger sensibilities that my sons have, you know, and I get to learn from them. I've co-written with a lot of different composers, like Gustavo Santaolalla, who's won 2 Academy Awards for Brokeback Mountain and for Babel. I work with him on like Jane the Virgin and Narcos Mexico, and I work I co-write with Clint Mansell on Titans and Doom Patrol, and whenever I co-write, I really delve into what is special about these guys that I'm writing with, you know, and it helps me grow. And the same thing happens with my sons. You know, I get a lot from them, and I'm sure they've gotten a lot from me over the years too. And so it's a great thing. So anyhow, getting back to whether it was really, it wasn't daunting to know. I mean, it's really exciting to know that the music's going to play alone. The daunting part was making the call to do electronic music in Star Wars, and it really, to that extent, had never been done before. Yeah. And that's a thing that, you know, you worry about. Not so much the fans, but just the property itself. It's like John Williams set up this very classically oriented kind of score, and we've tried to be faithful to that for, you know, I've written over 100 hours of music for Star Wars, more than anybody else, you know. So we never had gone that far away from the orchestra.
Yeah.
So what we did, and I think the reason it works, and then, you know, the fan outreach has been fantastic about it. So I believe it really worked well. But I think the reason it worked is that music, even though it's electronic, it still has this giant scope. that Star Wars has. You know, Star Wars is a bigger than life blockbuster property, and everything in it has just enormous scope. It's like Lawrence of Arabia, just over and over again, forever. You know, I mean, it's Star Wars. So I think that's the key, is that even though that music is electronic, it doesn't sound like a little Casio or some kind of little hip hop dealy or whatever. It's not. It's not some Saturday morning cartoon or whatever. It's still enormously rich sounding music, you know, and that was the tough thing. I think that was the biggest task.
Yeah. Now, you just actually mentioned it a minute ago, but you've done more than 100 hours of music for Star Wars, and which is more than John Williams. So like himself, he's done 9 episodes, and you've done 7 seasons of Clone Wars, 4 of Rebels, and like hundreds of hours of music. Is that a bit crazy to think like I've made more Star Wars music than the guy who created Star Wars music?
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, it's a great honor that I've lasted this long, you know. So I hope I'm doing something right. I mean, John Williams is the greatest film composer, hands down, ever to live, and the music he did for Star Wars is beyond. It cannot be topped. And so he gave me a great foundation to build on, you know, and it is nuts that I've written more than him, but you know, his themes are beyond belief. I believe I've written a couple of really good themes, and you know, I'm not like having false modesty or anything like that. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're Hans Zimmer or Danny Elfman or, you know, all these great composers. I'm sorry, John Williams beats us all.
Yeah.
And he just runs circles around us in terms of fantastic melodies and orchestration and stuff. So, you know, it's great that I've been able to do it for this long, and I hope I'm, you know, worthy of it.
Yeah, for sure. Earlier you mentioned that you find composing music for animation to be some of the most difficult work you've done, and you listed off a bunch of your live action work like Narcos and stuff like that. What's the difference for you between developing music for animation versus live action? Well,
a lot of times there is no difference. You know, I have to. It's funny. It depends on the property. I'm finding with Bad Batch, it's really similar to scoring live action. I mean, between Titans, which I'm doing now, and Bad Batch, it's very similar. Like I did Stuart Little a long time ago, which was a preschool show. And that was much more, it wasn't really Looney Tunes, but it was much more tied. And I also got nominated for an Annie for Stuart Little and for Harold and the Purple Crayon. And that the music in those properties is so tied to the action. So in a lot of live action, you can you come up with an idea, and you can let that idea run for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is. Sometimes that musical idea has, like, say, Duel of the Fates. Dun, 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 dun. That goes for a really long time. He had that great idea, and then he fleshes it out for a very long period of time. Well, with some animation at different times, you have an idea, and then 10 seconds, 5 seconds later, something else is happening, and you have to take a left turn, you know, and so you have to come up with a lot more ideas. You have to elegantly go from that one idea you had to the next one, and so you're just way more tied to the action at times with animation. That's what makes it really difficult.
Cool. Now, if we switch gears from Clone Wars to talk about Rebels, Clone Wars and Rebels are two very different shows within the Star Wars universe, both stylistically and thematically. How did you bounce from the Clone Wars to Rebels and then bounce back again?
Well, so I sort of touched on it a little earlier. Is, you know, again, it was driven by Dave Filoni, and you know, he had us go back at the beginning of Rebels and watch A New Hope, and one of the things we found was there's less music in A New Hope than you think. Episode 4, I mean, you remember the music because it's just earth-shattering music, but it's not wall to wall the way a lot of films are these days. And so we strategically in Rebels, we didn't have as much music. We continued to do that in Bad Batch, by the way, too. It lets the drama breathe. It makes it much more like a feature film to me. It makes it much more real. You know, you have all of a sudden, if all the music cuts out and there's just screaming, you know, spaceship engines or something, whatever is happening, or there's very deep emotions or something, you know, and you just hear the sound effects, kind of feels a little more real for a while. So we did that in Rebels. Also, Rebels had the reboot where, you know, musically, Dave said, let's go back and start using more of John Williams's themes, and let's go away from the world music that we used in the earlier times of Clone Wars and go back to pure orchestra. And even when we're not using the John Williams themes, we really scored it in the style of John Williams or somebody like Alan Silvestri or John Debney, those guys write in, which is a lot of classicism, not so much use of modern percussion or synthesizers or anything like that, just straight orchestral blockbuster music.
Yeah. Cool. Now, like you said, you used a lot of like Williams kind of style in Rebels to evoke that time period in Star Wars, but there were also times where you experimented with some of the music and various themes. One that really comes to mind for me when I think about Rebels is the journey into the Star Cluster.
Right.
Yeah, so from the episode Legends of the Lasat. So what was your inspiration for that piece?
You know, again, that was heavy into, you know, Zeb, who was a, you know, big, really fun character, and him returning, you know, to his home planet, or I think that's what it was. And, you know, that was a situation where Dave told me that the music was going to be really important and it was going to be highlighted. And we're not going to hear so much of the sound effects, you know, of going into this star cluster or nebula or whatever it was. So I had the idea to use a string quartet. And also, you know, we didn't play it as like it was in a big hall. We didn't have a lot of echo on it. It was really an intimate sound. And also to be, you know, kind of have this kind of, I wouldn't say Baroque, but, you know, early classical kind of feeling for a bit, but in a way it doesn't go the way Baroque music would go either. But it was and then it gets bigger and bigger, and a choir finally joins because, you know, the scene, it gets huger. So, I mean, that was just kind of the inspiration. Was just you know, we don't know where music comes from a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But you know, the concept was to go from the string quartet and then and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and finally just, you know, have a huge choir and a big orchestra at the end.
Yeah. Cool. The other piece that I like of yours from Rebels, as you know, Star Wars is known for its villainous themes. Like, you know, we've got the Imperial March for Vader, and like that, like the Emperor's like quiet theme. But in Rebels, you made a theme for, and a pretty great one for Grand Admiral Thrawn, who's a pretty huge fan favorite among Star Wars fans.
Yeah.
And unlike, you know, Vader and the Emperor or Tarkin, Thrawn had never been done before on film or TV. This was his introduction.
Yeah.
So what was that like to develop the theme for fan favorite character and like make it his introduction into like this type of Star Wars media?
Well, again, you know, I speak to how well versed Dave Filoni is in music, and it was his idea to have this giant cathedral organ as for Thrawn. And as soon as he said that, I was just like, oh, how cool. Because like you said, there's, you know, some great villain themes have been written for Star Wars. So, you know, the thing always becomes what to do next. And putting it in that kind of context where we're going to use an organ for him really changed everything and opened up a whole world of possibilities. Really, the bulk of the composition and the execution of that cue goes to my eldest son, Sean. And I've said that on other interviews. So, you know, the props go to him for pulling that off. And that's great validation for me to know that, you know, it's not just nepotism, and I'm not just being a proud dad and hiring my sons to co-write with me. They bring a real valid sense of professionalism that in their own right, and it's not just me hiring my sons.
Yeah. Cool. Now you've talked a lot about like working with Dave Filoni and even George Lucas back on the Clone Wars. Can you talk a bit more about that process of working with George and Dave Filoni on like finding like the emotional pieces and how to expand them, or creating like certain themes for characters?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway working, so George Lucas is much less like hands-on in terms of, he probably wouldn't have called out the pipe organ or had that idea, or, you know, although I believe he did have the idea for Bulgarian women's choir, which I'd never heard of before. Because he was really big on, you know, at the beginning of Clone Wars, every planet having its own ethnicity, and we were running out of ethnicities, you know, after a while. So,
yeah,
you know, that was a really great call. Both of those guys love to push the envelope. I would say George more than Dave, but then again, George probably more than anybody who's ever worked in film. And if you read some of the history of the Star Wars script, I mean, it was at one time, it was half of the dialogue was in Japanese because he got all into Kurosawa and the samurai and all that. And then, so you could see he's just, because he'd just done American Graffiti. And now he's going to do this space thing, and he had the Buck Rogers idea, but now he wants to push it. He doesn't want to just do Buck Rogers. So he just, and he would do this with me. He would bring in pieces of music that wound up not working because, but the point was, is he was just trying to push things early on, and in the same way that the being in Japanese wound up not working also, and he also what the great minds do is when you're trying a lot of crazy ideas, you got to know when it's a crazy idea. It's fine to try things, but you got to figure out, oh, well, that's just not going to work. Even though, and he obviously did a great job of that with the beginning of Star Wars. And he was also knowledgeable enough and had enough foresight to see with me that some of the things he was telling me to do were not working. And I had to, that was a give and take with him. There was one situation where, I think his son was listening to kind of a rap tune or a hip hop thing. And he wanted me to try it in, the space battle that Obi-Wan was having early on. And so I was positive that wasn't going to work. And so what I did was I did the hip hop thing because, he's my boss. I got to do what he's telling me to do. But then I also wrote something that had maybe some elements, rhythmic and percussive elements of the hip hop thing he'd given me, but also had the orchestra involved. So I played the hip hop thing for him first, and he's kind of digging it. And he turned around and he asked, what do you think? And I didn't like it, even though I'd written it. I didn't think it was working. So I said to him, I think it's kind of making us, be like Power Rangers, which, I meant the TV show, the features hadn't come out then. And he's like, oh, okay, well, what, and so then I said, here, listen to this. I did something that kind of has these beats in it, but it also has the orchestra and some of the, John Williams kind of flourishes and licks. And then that wound up working, So, he's good enough to trust people he hires, even though, you got to go and try something new because he wants it. Anyhow, he just loves to try new things. And so does Dave. And Dave is always pushing it. And it worked really well what we did with the end of Clone Wars. We just talked about those last cues being all electronic. And that was, Dave pushing the envelope.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And now we talked about John Williams a little bit ago. And obviously, you're a fan of John Williams and you're a fan of Star Wars. Do you have a favorite track or musical moment from Williams in the 9 episodes? Any that you absolutely love, or would say is your favorite?
Yeah, it's got to be the Twin Sons when it's the first time he uses the Force theme. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the greatest pieces of music ever written for cinema. Gabriel's oboe, by Ennio Morricone, other things like that. There's really unbelievable pieces of music that have been written for cinema, but I would take the Force theme. And, it was just, the execution was just superb. It was perfect for the scene. Mm-hmm. He just freaking nailed it. And he nailed it so dang many times. I remember going to Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. And by this time I was a huge Williams fan, but also I'm kind of thinking, well, what can he do now? Because he's done Superman, he's done E.T., he's done Raiders, he's done Star Wars. Okay, maybe he's out now.
Jaws too.
Right. Yeah. So and I go to Jurassic Park, and so there's that dun 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 da 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 dun dun. Wow, that's great. And then da 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 da. I'm like, what? Another one? There's 3 crazy immortal melodies in that film, and he'd already done 30 immortal melodies. This is why he can't be beat.
And then he goes on to do Harry Potter a few years later.
Yeah.
Man cannot be stopped.
That's right.
Yeah. How about you? Out of your Star Wars work, do you have a particular favorite of yours?
Yeah, it's the and you know, maybe the very first time it plays, it's the first theme
Sorry,
I ever
what
wrote.
which track was that?
Ahsoka's theme.
Okay. Yeah.
And if I had to pick a track, it would maybe Ahsoka Leaves,
Oh
um,
yeah.
which is on the soundtrack. Um, but anytime, I mean, Ahsoka is a great character in Star Wars. You know, in my mind, up there with Luke and everybody. You know, I mean, she is a great heroine, and to be able, I've written about 3 themes for her, and I'm really happy with all of them. I have one called Ahsoka's Victorious theme, which plays in the Clone Wars feature film when she's on a kind of a troop transport and it kind of takes off and she's looking
Oh
down
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's
around it, and
yeah.
I really like that one as well. So those are probably the 2 strongest things. Although it's either Sabine or Satine. I always forget, but I have a pretty strong melody that I'm very proud of also with those. But Ahsoka's, you know, I mean, what a great character.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And we've talked about kind of briefly, but your next Star Wars project is The Bad Batch, which premieres in a few weeks. How does that score differ compared to Clone Wars and Rebels? You said it's a little bit more like live action. Can you tease anything else about your score or the series?
Yeah, I can. So I play this instrument. Um, it's called a guitar viol,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a fretted. It's like a cello, like that, you know. But I play it really soloistically in a cue, and we're going to release it on the soundtrack. It won't be the first release of the soundtrack, but it'll be probably in the second release that we do.
Okay. Cool.
I don't play it all throughout the series. There's just a couple of cues where I have like an ethereal kind of electronic sound. Then I have a vocalist and this playing. You know, it's really bare. It's really exposed. What I like about this is it kind of sounds like a bad cello in a way, but not, you know, like a trashy, like a, you know, because it's smaller. It's not as rich as a cello, you know, in terms of its size and the richness of the tone. But there's kind of a raw edginess to it that I really like. And so, yeah, that's one of my favorite cues from Bad Batch. And, you know, I think I'm just continuing to try to find new things, and that's exciting. When I find a new thing like that, it's obviously, you know, that's really part of me, you know, playing that instrument, and I kind of compose it on that instrument. You know, that's something that I think I bring that's unique.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you very much for your time and speaking with me. Again, great work you've done through Clone Wars Rebels and your other work. Very much looking forward to Bad Batch. And again, great music. I really love
Thank you.
scores. All right.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you again for talking with us.